Hello. Today I'm going to talk to you about how to format an APA references page for a paper that you might be writing. I want to start first by just reminding everyone that you do have access to the APA guide. It should be posted and available for you in the course, so you can always reference this document if you need help. I'm going to make a separate tutorial that kind of outlines the various parts of the guide and shows you how to use them. But before we start, I just want to let you know that if there's anything that's unclear in the tutorial that I provide today, you can always go back to this written document to reference it and perhaps get clarification. So we're going to start with just a references page that is not properly formatted, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the elements that you need to keep in mind when you're putting together your references page. So references should be centered at the top of the page. You should have the header on the document. It should just be the last page of your document, so the header should just continue on. One thing to keep in mind is that you definitely should use the word references and not bibliography. Some students interchange those two terms, but a bibliography is something different. It is a list of all of the possible articles that your audience might be interested in reading if they wanted to learn more about this topic. Whereas a references page is a list of the actual sources that you used in your paper. It's very important that the entries on your references page are all cited at least once somewhere in your paper in an embedded citation. And anything that you use in your paper that includes an embedded citation should have a corresponding reference on the references page. So please keep that in mind. The first thing that we want to consider is that our basic formatting of our references page requires that our entries all be double-spaced. So we'll just change that. And then we need them to also be in alphabetical order. So if you've typed them all out, you can just use this ABC order tool and sort by paragraph. It doesn't look like it did it. Let me try again. Now it seems like it's right. I'm not sure why I had to do it twice, but they are in alphabetical order now. We also need to use a hanging indent. The instructions for that are in the APA guide. Highlight all of your entries, go to paragraph setup, and under indentation choose hanging. And then that sets it up so that the first line of every entry is left justified and any additional lines are indented. If you try to set this up manually just by hitting the space bar and moving the lines along, then it's going to get really messed up if you ever have to add in another entry or rearrange something, or even if you just copy into another document for some reason, everything will get kind of messed up. So it's definitely best to use the tool. So, all right, most entries begin with an author's last name. So we have last name, first initial. In this case, we have two authors, so we always use an ampersand. You would never write out the word and. You would always use the symbol. If you have the author's middle initial, you can include that. If you don't have it, don't worry about it. But your entry should always end with a period before you move on to the date. The date should include the year, the month, and the day if you have that information. If all you have is a year, just include the year. If all you have is a year and a month, just include the year and the month. But if you have the year, the month, and the day, include that information. It should be in order, year, month, day, and you should never abbreviate your month. Make sure that you put a period after the closing parenthesis right here to close out your date element. The next thing would be the article title. So in this case, the State of American Indian Education was the title of the article. Article titles have strange capitalization rules when you're using APA formatting. You only capitalize the first word any proper nouns or adjectives, and any words, the first word of any subtitles, or any word after a colon. So in this case, we are going to make this lowercase, and we're going to make this lowercase. If you are just copying in the title of your article from the original source, you have to make sure that you adjust the capitalization. So for example, in this example, the first word and November and Native Americans are all capitalized because they are proper nouns and adjectives. In this case, Delaware is the first word. Okay, here in this example, the education is the first word, Indian is a proper noun, and then running is the first word of a subtitle, or it's the first word after a colon, so it would be capitalized. All right, so we have author, date, title, and then if this is an internet source, that's all the information you're going to include other than the retrieval statement, which is simply just saying retrieved from, and you're going to copy the URL from the top of from the address bar of the page where you got this article. If you have a DOI, if the material is printed material and you have a DOI, then you certainly would use that instead. And a DOI simply would look like this. It would say DOI, and then there would be a series of numbers. So it might look something like this. A DOI stands for Digital Object Identifier, and it is a permanent link to the article that you are referencing. So that's always preferable if you have a DOI. In this example, we have author's last name, the date, we have the title. This is a printed source, a publication. This was published in the American Indian Graduate, which is the name of like a paper publication, a magazine or a newsletter of some sort. So the source is always going to be in italics. The next thing that you should have here would be volume, issue, and page number. Each one of those elements is formatted differently. So for example, if we look at this one down here, we've got Education Week. So this is the volume, this is the issue, and this is the page number. So the volume is in italics. The issue is not in italics, but it's in parentheses, and there's no space between those two entries. And then there's a comma, and then the page numbers. Now, there should not be any P period or PP period or anything to indicate page numbers. The page numbers should not be in italics and not in parentheses. So for this example, we know that this is page 16. We know that because it's not in italics, so it's not the volume, and it's not in parentheses, so it's not the issue. So it must be the page number. If you have all of this information, include it. If you're missing any of these elements, just skip ahead and include what you do have. If you don't have a date, you can't just skip the date entry. Instead, include N period, D period to show that there was no date. You always need a period after your date entry, after your parentheses. So this is a title, so this should not be in italics. This actually is a subtitle, and so these should be lowercase. Then we have our retrieval statement. These look good. This looks good. So the last two are blog posts and video files, and those are things that you may or may not use in any of your papers. Generally, you wouldn't use either of those for academic research, but you might use them in another kind of paper. So there is information on the APA guide on how to format those. I do want to point out that the difference between this retrieval statement and this retrieval statement. So this entry came from the internet. This person was online and found this article, and the retrieval statement, therefore, is the exact URL that will take you to this page. In this example, this person found this article through one of our online databases like EBSCOhost. I'm sure you've heard of that. If you're in EBSCOhost and you run across an article that was a printed document, right? This was published on paper, but it's now being compiled into a database. You still have to include a retrieval statement, and it can't be, www.ebscohost or whatever that link is that you would get. The reason for that is that your audience may not have access to EBSCOhost, so you can't provide that as a retrieval source. What you do is you just open up a new tab, open up Google or whatever search engine you use, and search Education Week. And then when you find the home page for that publication, you would copy that URL in as your retrieval source. So that's something to keep in mind when you are when you're using information that comes from our databases. And many instructors require that, so it's an important thing to know. So that covers most of the basics in terms of your references page. I do want to point out that if you don't have an author, you never would start with the date. You would always take, so for example, if we didn't have an author for this article, we would take the title and move it first. So then you would have the title and then the date and then the rest of the information in the entry. If it's an internet source and there's no author, if this is just a website that you're referencing, then you're going to have the title of the web page, you're going to have the date, if there was a date on it, and then you're going to have a retrieval statement. And that's all the information that you'll have in that case. So I think that about covers it. If you have further questions, feel free to contact me or reference the APA guide that's posted in your course.